Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am in the Rutherford district of Napa Valley with the one and only Julie Johnson of Tres Sabores. Julie is the owner and winemaker. We're sitting here on her property, this beautiful, beautiful property with the roosters in the background. Julie, welcome to Wine Soundtrack, and tell us a little bit about Tres Sabores.
Hi, Allison. It's really great. It's really great that you're here because to be here is to be in a very special place. I've lived on this property since 1987. It's been planted to something at least since the 19th century. Wow. We're actually very close to some of the olives that we make olive oil from, the pomegranates that we make all sorts of things, vinegar and pomegranate martinis and all of that from, but of course, most importantly, the grapes. Mm-hmm. We have Zinfandel and Cabernet Sauvignon and a little bit of Petite Sirah here. The Zinfandel has been planted here for over 50 years. So old vine, dry farmed, organically certified is kind of the way we roll here. We've been stewards now since 1987, and I just feel blessed to be able to live in this very special place. The west side of Napa is really dotted with these alluvial fans, and so our own little canyon gives us a well-drained soil, very special aspect, and an opening to the east side for the clusters in the morning, and a late summer shade factor from the mountains behind us that gives the vines a little extra time at the end of a warm summer day, particularly warm summer day these days, to just quiet down, cool down, get their juju back, and then get ready to continue ripening the fruit the next day. So
What is the total acreage of your property and planted and overall?
So here at Tres Sabores, the acreage is about 35 acres, but only about 12 acres are planted to grapes. And it's a mix of different types. We even have I know they're going to edit some of this out. So, they're not?
Nope.
Oh, can I start again?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to start all over?
Just start on that, yeah.
Well, here, let me start over.
The entire thing?
Yeah. No, we'll just keep going.
Oh, okay.
So let me ask that question again.
Yeah, ask the question again. Sorry.
So how many acres is this property and how many are planted?
So here at Tres Sabores, there are about 35 acres all told in this alluvial fan, but only about 12 acres are planted.
Okay. And then do you also purchase fruit?
We do. What's been great is that we've been purchasing fruit now since, since the middle aughts. We started by purchasing some Sauvignon Blanc from Sonoma Mountain. That's been an incredible vineyard to work with over the years, providing us with a single vineyard sourced Sauvignon Blanc that's hill grown, not really, really different from many other Sauvignon Blancs grown in valley floors in the area. So it has its own unique personality, which is really great. We've been working with the Guinea vineyard up in Calistoga to provide us with Petite Sirah, also for many years.
But you also have that grown here.
We also have that grown here. And we've done some estate Petite Sirah, but we also use as our foundation really the Guinea. And I started making a single vineyard Petite Sirah from that vineyard, tasting in the cellar and going, boy, I'm not going to make this part of a blend. I'm going to keep this solo. It's just so great, so mocha and kind of, I call it my perfect with mole wine, because it really is. I've always looked for harmony in flavors and character. I always look for wines thinking about, what am I going to eat with these?
We're going to get to that. But
overall, it's been so satisfying to to be working with fruit from other areas. Recently, we've started to work in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and we're sourcing not only a little Zinfandel from there that's been growing there for 100 years plus, but also some Picpoul and Petite Manseng, some Rhone varietals that are adapted particularly well to those ancient seabed soils.
Wow. And what's your total case production?
Just under 4,000 cases.
And are your wines 100% direct to consumer, or are you in different markets? How, in general, where do people find your wines?
Tres Sabores can be found mostly here. We don't even have a distributor in California. So we love being personal. And I guess COVID, if anything, pushed us more towards that. We'd always kept it small. And my goal is to keep it small so that we can welcome people here personally.
Great. So it is a very local wine
Very
that
local.
people have to come find.
We do distribute in a handful of states. In New York, in New Jersey, in Florida, in Georgia, a little bit of Texas, a little bit of Arizona, Michigan, one of my favorite distributors there, Chicago. So some people may find us, but not going to be on grocery store shelves, just really for restaurants and smaller, local, independent-driven wine shops.
So, Julie, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
I could say meeting my husband to be, who was a winemaker. And I could say actually having a friend order wine during college from a real restaurant, a real bottle of wine,
So
and
grown up.
tasting it, and so grown up and enjoying it. I can remember coming to Christian Brothers Winery in the mid-'70s and just being so impressed and so my senses turned on, everything being just wonderful and interesting and new. The whole idea of here's a horizon. I didn't grow up here in the Napa Valley. I grew up in Palo Alto, but I did go to summer camp up here really early on. So I've been in this area for actually off and on for all but 7 years of my life. So it's
grapes
been
were
wonderful.
familiar.
Great.
Everything.
Yeah, well, I've watched this area grow up, and not so much, there's been a lot of expansion and there's certainly been a lot of change, but overall the harmony and the sense of community has been something that I've really loved about being in this place.
So, obviously, you've been in the industry a long time, and you've been drinking wine for a long time along with that, and probably drunk a lot of really good wines along the years. I'm wondering if there's a particular wine that stands out as one of those aha moment wines, and if so, was it because of the occasion? Was it eye-opening towards a grape or a region? What was that aha moment wine, and why?
I can remember specifically sitting up at a counter in a restaurant in Calistoga in the late 70s, one of my first sort of professional come here with the winemaker places, and having a Ridge Geyserville poured. And wow, was that a mouthful, and lovely and yet restrained at the same time. And at that point it was still called Zinfandel, because I don't think they had realized that what they really had was a mix of a lot of varieties, really a field planting, a field blend, which we now know is one of the things that, in fact, I've returned to that kind of model with almost a field blend of Zinfandel, Petite Sirah, Cabernet, and one little percent of Petit Verdot. So in memory of that, really in memory of that taste of wine. I also remember the first time I was really sold wine. I went into the old Beltramos in Menlo Park, and I was asked 3 magic questions that nobody had ever asked me before, like, what are you looking for? Like, what are you going to be doing? And I said, well, I'm going to go to a concert, and I'm going to have a late afternoon, early evening picnic with some friends, and I'd like to have a bottle of wine that's going to go well with that. And they said, well, what do you like? Who asked that? It was such a wonderful thing, and it gave me a feeling of empowerment, and I wasn't going to be stupid walking into a wine shop not knowing anything. And I said, well, I love a lighter fruity wine. I'm just starting to get used to wine, and I'd like to see what you have to offer. And they sent me home with a Chenin Blanc from Charles Krug. And it was just slightly off dry. The last question they asked me was, how much do you want to spend? And also said and offered in the most incredibly humble, gracious way that, again, I didn't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm a starving student, so I have like no budget, right? And so, I mean, who all started out that way? We sold our motorcycle to be able to buy the grapes to start Frog's Leap, my first business and my first wine business. Well, I mean, how humble can you get about that? So to have somebody approach me early on just taught me so much about trying to help people come along in their experience with wine wherever they're at.
Right.
It's the same sort of experience that I try to offer colleagues and other growers who are not working on the quite as far into the organic spectrum of growing or regenerative growing as I am. Mm-hmm. There are so many different variations on the theme, and there's so many ways for people to move their experience and move their knowledge forward, be it just being sheer enjoyment of wine or getting into the nitty-gritty of the science of making wine and growing grapes.
Right. So with those memorable wines, which were both domestic wines, local wines for that matter, I'm curious now today, if we were to come into your home, into your wine cellar, your personal wine cellar, or wine refrigerator, or wherever you hide it, what would we find? Is it a lot of domestic wines? Do you have international wines? Or is it specific grapes or specific producers? A lot of your own wine?
Well, the answer to that is yes, a lot of our own wine, because there's nothing like being able to access the end of a bottle at the end of a day. That is a luxury, I guess. I have a lot of friends. John and I have a lot of friends in the business, and so we have an opportunity to taste their wines, but also a lot of wines blind in a couple of tasting groups that we belong to and have belonged to for a long time. Having a tasting group being part of that, you could call it a wine book club, I don't know, but especially when combined with fellowship and with good food, it's really magic. So when we travel, often with this group, we'll take a wine suitcase with us and come home with things. So we belong to very few clubs, but one of the clubs that I love belonging to is the Women-Owned Wine Club. And so that's introduced me to wines from other women winemakers in several states. Wow. And that's been absolutely wonderful to work with. We also are members with dear friends at Beckham Vineyards up in the Willamette Valley, because they supply us with the amphora, the clay amphora that they make on property and ferment on in property, but they supply us with the amphora that we make our Saint Laurent in. Yeah. So other than that, you'd see a broad smattering that represents wines of places that we've been and places that we're going to. So in my cellar right now, I have some Finger Lake wines. I have some wines from the Traverse City area, the Boss wines, for example. I have wines from Oregon. I have wines from Italy. I have wines from Portugal, from Spain, that, so that kind of encompasses what I have. We just hosted a tour with ZAP, Zinfandel Advocates and Producers, down the Rhine. So I have a number of special bottles of Rieslings and Pinots that are not sold in the United States that I brought home. So you'd see a real smattering.
Is there anything that you opened up recently that drank really well?
Ooh, I can't think of anything in particular, but I did come back with a sparkling rosé made from Tempranillo in the Sierra Nevada that was pretty interesting. So trying things like that are always, I think when you've been in the business this long and it's been a while and you're building those experiences, it's fun to try a lot of different things.
So you're working with a lot of different grapes, and you've just mentioned how many different wines you drink and varieties. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
If it's grown in your backyard, it's pretty perfect. I mean, look, you're looking at like what we're finding out about varieties that have been grown historically. Mm-hmm. Sicily was something like 1,000 indigenous grape varieties. There's something there, and there's always been that. I'll return to the Saint Laurent that we're making, that historically has been in Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, in Germany, in Austria. There's a reason why that wine developed there. Maybe it's just for the pork roasts and red, roasted red cabbage with walnuts. Maybe it's because of that wine still endures to this day, now that it's been transferred to the Carneros. Maybe there's a reason why, over 15 years later, I'm still making a Sauvignon Blanc from Sonoma Mountain, just because I happen to just adore fresh Dungeness crab tacos. It's that special place where those grapes are being grown. Either they've been grown from forever, from development there, or they've been brought to that place because that place is a special spot. Our Zinfandel here, I mean, when we moved here in 87 and people said, oh, you've got Zinfandel, you got to pull that out and plant Cabernet, because don't you know Rutherford is Cabernet country? Well, yes, you're right. Yes, but to preserve a varietal that grows particularly well, that you've found the combination of climate and soil, really the microclimate, really the terroir that fits that particular grape. What a celebration ensues.
Yeah, and you said 50-year-old vines, so they clearly found home here.
They're here. So whether indigenous or whether you've really found that great pairing between that particular variety and that particular piece of soil. I mean, I think a lot of us are questioning, especially with warming now, warming temperatures and uneasy climate changes and such swings and such unpredictability. We're questioning the varietals that have been brought to this area. I mean, all varietals essentially have been brought here, right. But looking at more the strategically how businesses have reduced the number of varietals that are available in the marketplace. And a lot of us are looking at that and going, perhaps there are other things that are going to be suited to this area going forward. Right. But then you have the longevity of grapes, right? So in the ground.
So perfection is an elusive term that is interpreted for you as a great fitting in the land. And I'm curious, because when we talk about perfection, a lot of people seek that out in different ways and defines it in different ways. And one of those things people ascribe to are critics and scores. So I'm curious your opinion on wine critics and scores.
Allison, if you're tasting my wine and you like it, then that's just great for me.
Perfect.
There's such an individual. I mean, I have a wine with a label called Perspective. Mm-hmm. And the graphic image is it's an old 19th century lithograph from London, and that I found for 13 pounds. But it just perfectly encapsulates the answer to your question, I hope, for people that are listening. And that perspective is you own it. Mm-hmm. And it really does depend on the time of, your wine, your level of wine enjoyment of any one wine really depends on the singularity of that taste. How many wines are you tasting at what time? So that your palate isn't completely mesmerized and numbed by the volume of wines that you might be tasting. It's the company that you're keeping while you're tasting, be it with food or, you yourself or good friends. That's or at a sterile, stainless steel table with a lab coat on. It's blind. There's so many different experiences that impact on someone's impressions, perspective on those flavors and aromas and textures and complexities at any one time. Being smaller does not insulate me against reviews, but I'd say that I admire people who can taste multiple wines in one sitting. I'm not inclined to go that way myself.
So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to come here to Tres Sabores yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
A place where they can relax and truly enjoy a wine tasting experience. So a lot of people say, oh, this is like Napa used to be. Well, I'd rather say this is what Napa can continue to be. A place for people to share a glass of wine, to share that experience together in a beautiful setting that truly has towering olive trees. You're right next to the vineyard. You feel really, I think it'd be hard for somebody to come here and not feel immersed in some aspect of grape growing, and the kind of diverse cultural practices, plantings and beauty. For me, there's nothing more beautiful than a bunch of pomegranates and all sorts of sages and basil in the garden and tomatoes, and in the context of also being next to a vineyard. So people get an idea that really this is a farm.
Yeah. So if space aliens were to land on your property right now, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with and say, welcome to Tres Sabores?
If there were some aliens that would come, there may have already been aliens here.
Possibly.
I've seen some bugs that look like aliens, that's to be sure, so who knows. But I would definitely offer them a glass of our Zinfandel, because it is the most authentic thing that we do, and it's been the wine the grapes that I've lived with now for well over 30 years, and they're dear. They're soulful. When I'm out, soon to be out, since we have variation now, I'm soon to be out sampling, picking, analyzing the grapes to be for the wine, and, trying to figure out a pick date for. We've gotten to know each other over the years, and I hope when I offer that alien being a glass of that wine that they'll find some of that connection in that glass.
I'm going to ask you about that in a second, but really quick question. For you as a drinker, red, white, or rosé?
White.
Still or sparkling?
Both. Please.
Fair enough. So speaking, what you were talking about of your connection, we know that every vintage tells a different story, and you've been here a long time and you've witnessed it. Do you see more variation year to year? Do you see more consistency? What have you noticed in your 30 years on this property?
Well, I think every year is a brand new year, and that's what you get to do. I mean, when you're approaching a single vineyard, we're of course sourcing from many other vineyards, so every vineyard is kind of new every year. But in general, the variation on the theme of the vagaries of Mother Nature and the natural swings in temperature, rainfall,
right,
early and late harvests, the variation on the theme seems to be more variable and more intense. So, for example, it's impactful when the length of time when it's cold at night seems to have diminished. So we have, I think, maybe we continue to have the regular cycles of variations in years, but now with the overlay of overall it being warmer, that's certainly been impactful and something that we're going to have to continue to contend with. So, for example, in our cellar, which we used to cool only with night air, and opening up the cellar doors and turning on the fans and so on, now I've had to implement a HVAC system just to make sure that we have a consistent temperature to deal with. We've changed some things in the vineyard as far as protecting the west side. Even though we get shade, really life-giving, really something that defines the style of the Zinfandel and Cabernet I produce from the estate here. Even though we get that late afternoon shade, we're still taking extra pains to managing the canopy to make sure that the fruit is more insulated against the late afternoon sun. We're also, as part of the whole toolbox of working as an organic farmer, we're always adjusting and always working with shoot positioning. We're always working with opening the canopy to air, to flow, wind flow, whatever that is, and to light, and evening that out. I think is all very helpful. The other thing that we're doing is on the ground, in the soil. And so this year we shifted to a total no-till program, or almost total no-till program. And that's an insulator, and it's actually lighter. When we mow or crimp the cover crop that we plant every year, that provides more of a natural cover, just like Mother Nature, like duh. But that provides that type of a cover that's not dark, doesn't absorb as much heat, and is also, I believe, this year especially, is going to be proved to be more protective for the vine.
Are there any sort of signs or omens that you use as predictors of what a vintage is going to give you?
Whoa, any more? I have a library now of all of the statistics and everything that we can access, and everybody's assessment of the vintages, and then a whole library of recaps on vintages, and then going back and tasting what we have in our cellar now, which is almost 25 years of wine. Will soon be 25 years of wine. So that all offers, again, that magic word perspective on the vintages. Going forward, there's a certain amount of, whoa, we're going to have to respond to this. Like last year, for example, the super prolonged triple-digit heat wave that happened. The vines are hardwired for what we do here, for dry farming, for resilience. They really are. I mean, otherwise, why would they have been around for 10, cultivated? Exactly. I mean, they've been around forever, right? But when that first woman, who was a hunter-gatherer, put those wild grapes in a goatskin bag and came back a couple days later and was like, whoopee, there's a reason why that tradition carries through to today, and it's based on the fact that these are perennials that are quite incredible, right, and resilient. So we're working with the strength of that fact when we're going forward to meet the new challenges ahead of us in terms of temperature fluctuation.
So I know that you're a gardener at heart, and that's where you started, and you spend a lot of time outdoors. I'm curious what kind of communication you have with your vines. Do you talk to them? And do you reprimand? Do you coddle? Do you have to yell at them ever? Or what's your communication with your vines?
It's gentle. It's respectful. I mean, I have a routine for sampling, and when you're sampling Zinfandel, you're not just sampling one berry. So actually, by the time I'm making a lot of passes, my mouth is full of berries, and so it's hard to talk to them literally at that point. It's like, oh, this is good. You're doing well. Keep on going. Or like, basically, you got to be kidding me. Well, especially to explain that, especially with Zinfandel, because Zinfandel is notorious for ripening unevenly. So in any one cluster, there can be a slightly more ripe berry and a slightly underripe berry, and then everything in between. And so you're looking at a cluster that's, just like trying to figure this out. Give me a break. I got to pick you at some point. What is this all about? So Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of matter of fact.
Yeah.
That's not as gentle as I think, but
well, I mean, if it's not going to ripen evenly, you've got to kind of chat with it.
Yeah, it's respectful. So we do clip off the shoulders, the wings on our Zinfandel as kind of a late green harvest, and that's sort of unique. I'd be doing that anyway in fine Zinfandel making, but I found several years ago now that those wings make very tasty rosé. And so when we're going in and hand harvesting those wings, which is quite an involved process, we're talking to them for sure and said, don't worry. You're
going to keep growing.
You're still going to be red. By the time we take the main cluster off, don't worry. The white wine is just fine. Don't worry. It'll be great. You're going to ripen more evenly now. You're going to feel great. We're just giving you a chance to take a big sigh of relief and gather some more energy back, and then let's keep it going, guys,
So you're a small team here. It's you and your husband and a couple other people. And I'm curious, do you have any sort of good luck rituals that you do as an individual or as a small team to kick off harvest?
We try to get together and have a harvest meal for sure. Some type of harvest meal early on. Not a specific routine per se, but because we are small, but most of our people have been here forever. Miguel Garcia, who's cellar master, assistant winemaker, just has an incredible sense of what this whole property is about. And so we're meeting and talking and experiencing and all out in the vineyard together, and there's just a great sense that we have to work together and have to respect the vines, but have work on their schedule to some extent. But to do that, we have to be organized and working together too. So there's a great deal of mutual respect, all around respect, and everybody works very hard here when it's a small place.
So when you were a little girl, what did you want to be when you grew up? Was wine something that, or gardening, was that something that you wanted to do, or was there something else?
I think there was nobody more surprised about the track I took than my high school counselor, who thought I was going to be an English lit major, and then I wasn't. Then I discovered biology and ornithology and microbiology, and so things kept going. Then I discovered public health and nursing and the power. But I think overall, and this is where having a small winery where I can be out there greeting guests most of the time actually really comes into play, because I guess what I'm talking about all the way through has been an enjoyment of education. I've always enjoyed reading books out loud to people. I've always enjoyed show and tell. I've always enjoyed now taking people out in the vineyard. So it could be maybe when I was a home health nurse, I was visiting people in their homes. I was trying to teach them. I was trying to give them some insight into how they could achieve a healthier, balanced lifestyle in general, and either recover from what was ailing them, or take them into the last life passage. Those cycles and that sense of being able to educate and love learning about things and passing that on is something that's continued. And so, yes, to my English lit counselor, winemakers write so much. So I guess it's coming back to that in a weird and wacky way. But, I have always loved getting dirty, and that's been great too.
So when you're not working, how do you like to spend your free time?
At this point with my grandchildren, at this point traveling and discovering something entirely new, be it an archaeological ruin or a new vineyard or a new culture, a hummingbird in Costa Rica. In my spare time I swim to stay sane. I call it I call it sanity swimming, and hiking is great. Getting up into the Sierras, my special spot is up in the Yosemite area, greater Yosemite area, or out by the seashore. When I was growing up in Palo Alto, California, and I had to make a decision whether to go to school down the street or whether to go back east, I went to both the mountains and the seashore and made a decision to go nautical miles as far away as I could from Palo Alto, California, and that's stuck, and that's been a spirit of just discovery that I've been really fortunate to be able to experience.
And when you're planning a romantic evening for you and John, what kind of wines get open for a romantic evening?
Well, we'd usually start with like a single grower champagne. In my book, that's just a lovely way to start any evening. And then go on just to have a really quiet, lovely, we can go to some place where we can order a couple of different types of glasses of wine. I think that's a wonderful thing, but we tend to be very experimental with food and tend to love the wines that somebody's picked out to go specifically with their cuisine. So I think for us, the foods of discovery and spicy foods and international foods are always great joy. And so what wines go with those? Discovering that. That's just spending some time together and enjoying. Or, being out in a way someplace. We practice what's called referral traveling. So the absolute ideal is to find a restaurant that just looks fascinating, and maybe it's the number of bottles in the window, or it doesn't look too pretentious, but the menu looks interesting, and then we find a waiter that we rate, and then we're like saying to them, hey, we're traveling, we're really interested in something that's not touristy. What are the places that you recommend us to? And then we go to one place and it's terrific. And then we have a list of 3 more places to go to, and they're even more terrific and more adventurous, and that's very romantic.
Yes. So speaking of food, and obviously you love to explore and try it, how do you approach food and wine pairing? Are there rules that you follow? Are there tips that you kind of connect, or do you just open what's interesting and have fun and see if it works?
You can really plan. You can really plan and plot that out. And I think when it comes to professional tasting and tasting blind and then having a meal afterwards, it's always, my colleagues are terrific at doing that. Mm-hmm. And I try to be good and interesting about doing that as well. The wines that we serve here at the winery, they do have some particular highlights that we tend to try to point out to people. We serve a charcuterie plate that works in terms of the cheese choices and charcuterie choices. That's pretty ubiquitous in terms of what happens. But if I'm opening up a Zinfandel, my first go-to would be something like duck. So last night it was a duck rillette at Bistro Gentil mixed with a little bit of goat cheese. That could have been paired with a lot of things, but boy, was it delicious with Zinfandel, for example. So I do think about those kinds of things. But the interesting thing is that I also think not just about flavors, but more about textures too. So if it's light-bodied wine, it would need to be a light-bodied, vivacious dish as well. And so let the flavors, a friend of mine, Sarah Scott, says, all you really need at that point is a squeeze of lemon in one hand and a tub of salt in the other. And you can adjust just about any dish to meet the tannin or textural or acidic challenge in a wine and food pairing. So, sometimes that's very helpful in a restaurant setting where you don't necessarily have the matchy going on.
Well, when we're speaking about advice, since you were just giving some tips, I'm curious if there's a piece of advice someone gave you along the way that you try to live life by or work by, something that reminds you that you're reminded of it on a daily basis.
When I first started to drink wine, first started to learn about wine, I was trying to cut out, take off labels and put them in the World Atlas of Wine and understand where things were coming from and so on. And, it was sort of like, taste a glass of wine. What do I think about this? What's my analysis? What do you think about it, to my companion? And the best piece of advice was, when you're out enjoying wine, be it at a winery, be it in a restaurant setting, relax and enjoy that wine. Take a minute, no matter what else you're doing, to just sip slowly and savor that wine before you even take a bite of food. Because to do that, that's one of the reasons why we use natural cork, because I love that tradition that just, even with food in front of you, it just gives you a moment to pause and enjoy that experience. It really is very pleasurable. That's why we're still doing it all these years, right? But to relax, to take a moment to relax and enjoy and sip and savor, I can't emphasize that enough. And then you can go on and, what do you think? Is it too acidic? How did they make it? Is it too much of an international style? Is it over the top? Is it under the top?
But yeah, sometimes we have to stop and just be present in something.
It is absolutely that presence. And so then, where does that lead you? If you've hauled a bottle of wine to the top of a hill on a hike, and I can guarantee you that bottle of wine is the best bottle of wine you've ever had in your entire life, go with it.
Yeah.
That's the kind of feeling that's been good advice to follow.
So when you look back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
My career. Reading the possibility of kismet, taking advantage of the serendipity factor. So when I decided that the reason if I was going to stay in this business, this was about 20 years into being a professional, I had decided that I needed to make a move, and I had told myself that if I found something unique that I could do, that I would stay in the business. And so I'm proud of finding that. Mm-hmm. And then I'm proud of making the decision to, even though it was a crazy decision, I'm proud of staying on this ranch. So the main decision, the main aha moment was I could hire. What was a winemaker's relationship with the land and with their vines? Always been fascinated with that, because that's, again, the perspective, such a personal relationship. So I found 3 people who were crazy enough to work with me, and I gave them fruit from here, and they each made their own Zinfandels. And then the moment that was different was those 3 people, we sold those wines in 3-packs. Mm-hmm. So it was an instant taste of terroir. It was Tres Sabores. It was 3 flavors. Not only what's in the glass, the vine and the terroir and the good company around the table, but it was a taste of their relationship. And that was a new approach, at least having it packaged and assembled and
that's how I first met you. I tasted those wines years ago.
Conceived that sort of horizontal, and it was ahead of its time in many ways. But other people like you, I'm so glad. I'm so glad for that. Other people will still come to me and say, I was first introduced to your wines when you had the Tres Sabores, the 3 winemaker project. Well, that project taught me how to make wine. That project taught me about this vineyard. We were picking this vineyard 2 times. Now we pick this vineyard about 9 different times. So we learned so much. So I'm proud of being open to that serendipity factor of how many times could we harvest this wine and harvest these grapes and make a better wine, capture the moment a little bit better. So I'm proud of doing that. And I guess I'm proud of now my kids standing by me, my husband standing by me and reinforcing the decision that this has been a good path.
So we're sitting at a table, your wines are on the table, and there's an empty seat next to you. who from any walk of life would you love to share a bottle of Tres Sabores?
Oh, would probably be a poet. And I can't think, that's a very spontaneous response. I can't think of anybody specifically, but I would like to hear, because I think that their reaction or their response or their relationship I'd like to think that that would be, that we would both learn more from that experience. It also could be a jazz musician, because probably a great sax player, because the range is great and the ear is great, and there's a certain sense that there's a rhythm, and that I would learn a lot from, we would both again learn a lot from each other in that and experience. Sometimes I will tell you though, I wish Aretha Franklin was right there, because when I'm in the middle of harvest and one fermentation is not going particularly well, I just want her to belt out respect, it's just got to happen, because you guys got to listen, but I would want her right there at that particular moment in time.
If only she could share a bottle to know how her voice has inspired your wines.
Yeah, well, we count on that. But other times it's definitely, one of the things for our interns is that they absolutely have to come with a playlist, so that, sometimes it's time for country, sometimes it's a cumbia, sometimes it's just, really the most gentle of classical music. So there's when Miguel brings out the country, I know we're kind of in business. It's all things are good.
Well, I like at your table that you want to have, it's a very creative table, because you'll have a poet and you'll have a musician as you drink wine. But I'm curious if you can complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
Oh, an empty pot, a drawer unfilled, a shoe without a hiker. It's like, oh my gosh, what?
So, just to briefly touch on this, you've spoken a lot about climate change and getting warmer. Think we'll be drinking wine in 300 years?
In 300 years. Well, my goal as a steward of this land from the very beginning has always been tracked from something I read about the sense of indigenous people's relationship with the land, and it's kind of the thought that a land could be productive 7 generations hence. And I don't know that I've ever looked, that's not 300 years, but close to it enough, with all of us living longer, maybe so. And so I guess I've always felt that the stewardship factor is really important. We're going to have to adapt. There are dangerous, ominous signs of agricultural, oceanic and agricultural collapse. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope people are wise enough to pull back and to work together on that. I'm not overly optimistic. I know what my colleagues and what our goals are as far as trying to help educate each other about how best to go forward and respect what we have. Do it better all the time. And now, like here at the winery, there's research in songbirds and soils and raptors going on. That didn't happen 10 years ago. We wanted it to happen, but it was so anecdotal. Now that it's happening, I'm far more optimistic as people start to do research that links insect vectors and native habitat conservation, preserving and conserving and implementing conservation habitat where it's been taken away and where we've succumbed to the sense that a monoculture is the only way to farm. As those linkages, birds and insects and habitat and the vines themselves and the exploration of the microbiome and the soils and how to preserve that and cultivate that and nourish it, how those linkages are being researched and tied back together again. We never knew it as analytically ever 1,000 years ago, but I think people had a sense of that. That's why they planted in a more diverse way or implemented intensive grazing, progressive grazing. People had a sense of that, and they followed nature's ways. But now that we're back into analyzing and linking those elements again, I think there's now, I really feel like there's progress being made again in understanding where someone could go with that and where a farmer can adapt gradually. You know me, I'm like, okay, let's just go for it. This is a lab. Let's just think of the risk involved as something that's part of the program, plan for that and go for it. That a lot of my colleagues are not as they're much more risk adverse than I am. Well, there's still little pieces that people can implement. And with a community like Napa that holds together, in a program I work with very closely, Napa Green, there are all those elements there for people to start to implement. And I think there we make that courage to make that progress, to keep moving ahead is a big key.
Well, we're almost finished. I have a couple quick answer questions. One is, you're being sent to a deserted island. What 3 wines do you take with you?
I take a cava.
Okay.
I take a really yummy Zinfandel that will last me, hopefully. I don't know, what would I use? A shell for a plug or something? Hopefully I would have many sips and many moons and not worry about life too much sipping with that. And then I think I take some white wine that can be chilled in the surf.
Any particular variety?
I love Picpoul right now, or Sauvignon Blanc.
Nice and crisp.
Very. Just perfect with seafood, with sushi, right? I'm thinking sushi. Zinfandel is absolutely fabulous with tuna, and so, there I've got the seafood element covered.
You'll be perfect. So now we play our little game with wine and music pairing. You were talking about how you have all your interns bring playlists, that you listen to music, and wine conjures up emotion the way music does. So based on some of the wines we were talking about, tell me what you'd want to be listening to or what it makes you think of. So let's start with your Sauvignon Blanc from Sonoma Mountain.
Something melodic, something Vivaldi, something that uses a lot of woodwinds.
Your peak pool that you're so excited about.
Oh, that's got to be some sort of a cappella, highs and lows, kind of with a jazzy beat.
And your rosé of Zinfandel, which I absolutely love.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for that. There's nothing better. It's an all-day rosé, right?
It's a white Zin that changes your mind on all white Zins for the world.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely some type of dance music, anything, I don't know, we turn on K-Pig that has just about everything independent. And so if you go from one song to the next, you're just going from one great riff to another, and that's kind of the way you drink rosé. Is like, okay, what am I doing now? Let's have a glass of rosé. Okay, what am I doing then? And I'm gonna have a glass of rosé. It's easy. Yeah. It's like you can really chill it, or you can have it slightly chilled, and so that goes with kind of K-Pig radio station all the way through every genre. Funk to jazz, to old masters, to country.
And last but not least, your Zinfandel, your estate Zin that you would be giving out to your space aliens if they came here.
Yeah, that would definitely be with a great jazz master, a Monk or Roy Hargrave, back saxophone, and I don't know. Can't even begin to name all the greats, but it's definitely, I say my Porcano blend is a salsa party. I say my Zin is a jazz club, for sure.
I love that. Well, Julie, my last question, it's a two-parter. One is, what wine region in the world is at the top of your bucket list to go explore?
I would like to go back to Croatia. Because that's where Zinfandel's birth was, and there's so many interesting, again, indigenous varieties to discover there. I've been to Morocco, and that was a pretty interesting wine region. But I definitely want, I guess at the top of my bucket list in terms of what I'm going to be doing next, probably, is go back to Portugal and then up to visit some friends in Galicia in northwestern Spain, because there's a lot to study there. But now that we're working more with Rhone whites, I think, and I have some good friends in the Rhone, I would love to be there. So that's too many regions, right?
No, not too many.
I've got a lot of traveling to do.
So while you're like planning your travel around the world, if people want to plan travel here, how can they visit you? What will they experience? Where will they find you?
The best place to find us is on a phone call and calling and saying, when can I visit? And we'll set you up with a personalized visit here. And a lot of people celebrate special occasions or bring families or bring dogs, which gives us a little special kind of niche here because there's lots of room and you're right next to the vineyard. And so if people want to come and say howdy and take a nice hour and a half off from their visit to Napa routine, which people can get into that sort of I've got to visit this winery kind of thing. If they want to take just a nice, relaxed, immersive look at the Napa Valley on the west side in Rutherford, just call us. But we're also on the web, and we also are Instagram at Trace Sabores. That's a nice way to connect with us as well.
Yeah, so I highly recommend coming out here. It's beautiful, it's peaceful. They have picnic benches set up among these giant olive trees, and you sit under there as you sip wine looking at the vineyard. It really is idyllic. So, Julie, thank you for joining us on Wine Soundtrack, and let's go drink some wine.
Oh, please. Thanks, Allison. What a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.